It's time for Security Now. Lots to talk about. Industry-wide Patch Tuesday. Is that such a good idea? Lots of bug fixes. Steve's got a list. Also coming up in just a little bit, TikTok. They got caught collecting your biometric information? Really? And then a great story from Steve about how he fixed a friend's laptop. This was a life-or-death situation, and Steve rode to the rescue. It's all coming up next on Security Now.
Podcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is TWiT.
This is Security Now with Steve Gibson, episode 823, recorded Tuesday, June 15th, 2021. TLS Confusion Attacks. Security Now is brought to you by Worldwide Technology and Fortinet. When was the last time your company updated your security strategy? Are your business assets protected? WWT combines strategy and execution to secure your organization and drive business outcomes. Visit wwt.com/twit to get started. And by ExtraHop. When cyber criminals get past your business's defenses, you need a plan for detection and response. Learn more about how ExtraHop stops breaches 84% faster and explore the interactive demo at extrahop.com/securitynow. And by Barracuda. 91% of all cyber attacks start with an email. Use the Barracuda email threat scanner to find the cybersecurity threats hiding in your Office 365 email right now. Get your free email threat scan at barracuda.com/securitynow. It's time for Security Now, the show where we cover your security and privacy online with the man and the myth and the legend, Mr. Steve Gibson.
Big on myth.
You're man and legend. I don't know about the myth part. Good to see you.
Oh, Leo.
Uh-oh. What's the matter?
Well,
bad guy's winning again?
We're all going to be very depressed by the end of this podcast. But that's the way it goes, unfortunately. And that's the way it goes.
That's the way it is.
That's the way it is. We're going to start, however, by looking at, I think, a fun moment-by-moment reconstruction of a recent Chrome browser attack and patch battle. Or maybe it was a pitched patch battle. Anyway, then we're going to recap last week's industry-wide June Patch Fest, followed by looking at TikTok's controversial but unsurprising privacy policy update. We need to cover also that wonderful spy novel-ish ANOM sting operation, which was just breaking as we were recording last week's podcast. And of course, it lowered the boom on as many as 800 criminals. For our happily infrequent Errata section, we'll challenge an apparently erroneous statement I made last week, and actually based on something I just saw The Verge post, it now seems almost assured that it is incorrect. Then I want to share an interesting laptop data recovery experience, which BitLocker made much more complex a few weeks ago, which I think our listeners will find interesting. I had it in the show notes yesterday, just like a note to talk about it, but we didn't have time. I think we will this week. Then we're going to tackle this week's topic of some very troubling research, which again demonstrates just how difficult it is to design robustly secure networked systems, even if nobody makes any mistakes. If there are no bugs, if there are no patches, if nothing is wrong, it still doesn't work. And yeah, so we will discuss what I'm calling TLS Confusion Attacks, although they are unfortunately named the Alpaca Attacks.
Oh, yeah. I remember those.
Alpaca.
Yeah.
Well, Alpaca, yeah. And we do have a fun, not very surprising, but, it's a useful picture of the week. So overall...
Is it a picture of an alpaca?
No.
Oh, okay. I had to learn recently the difference between an alpaca and a llama. Alpacas...
They're not the same.
No. Alpacas are the cute ones. Literally, look at a picture. Just while I'm doing this ad,
Okay.
look at a picture. Just Google alpaca and llama, and tell me if I'm not right. That's how I remember the difference. We'll have more with Steve in just a second, including our picture of the week, which is not of a cute animal. Are they, I'm trying to remember, are they cloven-hooved? I don't know.
Apparently, you raise them and shear them, right?
Yes, just like llamas, yes.
Yeah.
Although they're a little more amenable to that, I think, than llamas are. Llamas are mean. Anyway, our show today, that's neither here nor there, because our show today is brought to you by Worldwide Technology and Fortinet. WWT. Well, you know the name Fortinet, of course, great security company. But I want you to know about WWT because they are the kind of company that can implement security policies, help you implement security policies to protect your business. You got to know, and if you listen to this show, you do know, in fact, it's probably why you listen to this show, attackers are constantly evolving their attacks. And they're not getting worse. They're getting better. So you need to evolve your defenses. So that's why you need to call WWT. They can help your company prepare and combat next generation threats. WWT is the perfect company for this. They're built to do this, in effect. They have the vision, they have the services, they have the capabilities needed to deliver security controls to reduce the risk to your organization, and they are always up to date. They have their finger on the pulse, as it were. WWT's team can provide resources and platforms to keep you safe in an increasingly threatening environment. They've been doing it for 30 years. I hesitate to say that because they're not old-timers. They are absolutely state-of-the-art, up-to-date. It's just I do want to mention it because that means they have the track record, and they do, to help you succeed. I can give you some case studies, recent case studies. They worked with a large healthcare organization. They were about to move to certified electronic health records, right? That's what everybody's trying to do. But they were wise. They called WWT to do a security risk assessment because, you know, this is important stuff. You don't want to get this wrong. WWT's consultants came in. They used expert knowledge, state-of-the-art tools, in-depth analysis. They did skilled training and repetition. It's funny because if you look at the assessment, it's great. The one that I noticed immediately, because it's something we talk about all the time on this show, 90% of the vulnerabilities they found in the health record technology could be fixed simply by putting in a comprehensive, systematic approach for patching. Of course. Now, you know that and I know that, but it's a lot harder for an enterprise to know exactly where the problems lie, and WWT found it. They fixed it. They trained the staff. They made sure that this healthcare organization was doing it right. Worked with a retail bank, same problem. Their goal in this case was to create an infrastructure that could survive a catastrophic cybersecurity event. That should send chills up your spine. A retail bank threatened with a catastrophic cybersecurity event. Yikes. But WWT was able to come in, and again, with their expertise, they reduce system outages by 40%. In fact, they even saved this bank 48% by automating infrastructure. So that's the thing. It's a holistic assessment of what you're up to. It covers risk management. You can connect your organization's business goals and objectives to technical solutions and reduce risk for your organization. They talk about endpoint security, network security, identity and access management, cloud security. Look, the point is WWT does it all. See how WWT and Fortinet can protect your business assets and intellectual property with a holistic security approach. It takes a special company to do this. That's WWT. Go to WWT.com/twit to get started. Let Worldwide Technology help you. If you ever get a chance to go to St. Louis and see their world headquarters, you will get a real sense of how significant this company is and the investment they put into, the time and the effort, the Advanced Technology Center, the training they constantly undergo to make them the best company for your company to do business with. WWT.com/twit. Worldwide Technology. Make a new world happen with WWT. And we thank them so much for making Security Now happen. We thank you for supporting Security Now by making sure you use that address so they know you saw it here, wwt.com/twit. I am ready to fire up the picture of the week, Mr. G.
Well, this is pretty simple, but I got a little bit of a kick out of it. It's just a single frame cartoon. Shows two bad guys in black hoodie masks. One's got a mask on, the other's got a larger ski mask and glasses. And the first guy says, "Hey, Harvey." So, and they're both sitting in front of laptops, doing their dastardly deeds. "Hey, Harvey, someone hacked into my bank account and stole all the money I made from ransomware. This is so unfair." Anyway.
It's funny because it's true.
It's sad.
Yes. Somebody might be the FBI. We don't know. But yeah.
Yeah. So Google is finding that with offering the world's #1 web browser comes being the world's #1 web target. Using some reports published by Kaspersky Labs, I was able to reconstruct a timeline of some recent Chrome vulnerabilities and fixes, and what it reveals is instructive. So exactly 2 months ago, during April 14th and 15th of this year, Kaspersky Labs detected a wave of highly targeted attacks aimed at multiple companies. Those were companies that were that are paying them to oversee their security, monitor their web traffic, keep an eye on things, thus the way they were able to detect this. Upon closer analysis, Kaspersky discovered that these attacks were exploiting chained Chrome and Windows zero-day vulnerabilities. Though they were unable to retrieve the exploit code itself, which was used to accomplish remote code execution in Chrome, they were able to obtain and analyze an elevation of privilege exploit that was used to escape the sandbox to obtain system privileges. And remember that while we tend to focus upon remote execution attacks, because those are so obviously bad, exploitable elevation of privilege vulnerabilities are also extremely powerful, since they inherently breach the security boundaries that we rely upon to allow externally provided browser code, JavaScript and WebAssembly, to run in our browsers while curtailing what that code can do. If code can arrange to make itself privileged, then can do is what results. And that's not what you want from code that you've obtained from someone you don't really trust. So in this case, the elevation of privilege exploit that they discovered had been fine-tuned to work against the latest and most prominent builds of Windows 10, well, not only the latest, but dating back to 17.763, which was RS5, and included 18.362, which was 19H1, 18.363, 19H2, 19.041, 20H1, and 19.042, 20H2. So, there was some serious attacking going on. And it does all this by exploiting two separate vulnerabilities in Windows OS kernel once it escapes from the browser. So 5 days after this discovery, on the 20th, Kaspersky had figured out what was going on, pulled a report together, and reported these vulnerabilities to Microsoft, and 2 successive CVEs were assigned. 2021 31955, which was an information disclosure vulnerability. That's actually a kernel disclosure, which we'll be getting to when we talk about this past week's patches, and also 31956, which is the elevation of privilege vulnerability. Both of these in the wild vulnerabilities were patched, as I said, last Tuesday as part of June's patch cycle. The observed attacks were all conducted through Chrome, But as I noted before, Kaspersky was unable to retrieve the JavaScript which fully implemented the entire exploit. But they did have a clue. The Pwn2Own competition that had taken place the preceding week, April 6th through the 8th, which we talked about at the time, and of course, Chrome was a prominent target of that. During the competition, one of the participating teams was able to successfully demonstrate an exploitation of the Chrome renderer process using a type mismatch bug. And a few days later, on April 12th, the Chromium developers committed 2 new issues, 119.6683 and 119.5777, to the open source repository of V8, which, as we know, is the Chrome and Chromium JavaScript engine. Both were type-related bugs. One of these bugs, that 6683, patched the vulnerability that was used during Pwn2Own. And both bug fixes were committed together along with regression tests. Regression tests are JavaScript tests which are used to trigger the vulnerabilities. And of course, they're important because you want to keep those vulnerabilities from ever coming back by mistake in the past. Later that same day, a user with the Twitter handle R4J0X00 published a working remote code execution exploit on GitHub targeting an up-to-date version of Google Chrome. That exploit used the vulnerability from issue 6683 to execute shellcode in the context of the browser renderer process. The exploit, published to GitHub, did not contain a sandbox escape and was therefore intended to only work when the browser was launched, and you wouldn't normally do this, with the command line option no sandbox. So not a huge concern, but still interesting. Then, on the 13th, the day before Kaspersky first became aware of the attacks in the wild, Google released Chrome Update 89.0.4389.128 for Windows, Mac, and Linux, with fixes for 2 vulnerabilities. The one, that CVE 2021-21-220, used during Pwn2Own, was one of them. However, since several of Kaspersky's customers who were attacked on those first 2 dates, so the April 14th and 15th, already had their Chrome browsers updated, Kaspersky believes that the Pwn2Own originated vulnerability was not used in those attacks because it would have failed against those just updated browsers. Then, the next day, on the 14th, Google moved from their version 89 to version 90. And of course, we covered that move also. There was a whole bunch of features fixed. That was, a major planned feature release. And that brought out 90.0.4430.72 for Windows, Mac, and Linux. This release closed the door on 37 vulnerabilities. And on the same day, on that 14th, a new Chrome exploit was posted on GitHub, and which of course released it to the public. That newly published exploit used that second vulnerability, the 5777, which, even though it had been committed on the 12th, still worked on the just released Chrome 90 from the 14th. So, there was just like a 89 apparently may have fixed it, but technically 90 regressed because it wasn't part of the planned release in 90, and that change had just been committed prior to, probably after 90 essentially was RTM'd. So that problem, this 5777 problem, was fixed 6 days later on the 20th. Kaspersky suspects that the attackers were also able to use the JavaScript file containing the regression test for that second problem to quickly develop the exploit, and were probably using the second vulnerability in their attacks. So, talk about cat and mouse. What do we learn from this? We learn that attackers are extremely active and deft at scrutinizing everything that happens in public view. They're looking everywhere at once. In this instance, the results of the pwn-to-own competition likely primed them to be on the lookout for Chromium commits that would soon follow. And they did. The Chromium project is at a disadvantage of inherently being open. It's a good thing to create JavaScript regression tests to make sure the bugs which have been fixed never return. But as likely happened here, the appearance of the regression tests probably predated by 8 days the deployment of an updated Chrome browser which fixed those flaws due to just like a one-day timing uncertainty. That created that 8-day exploitation window during which a problem was publicly known and documented, but not yet patched and in the hands of Chrome's users. We can also see from this almost minute-by-minute back and forth that those who are responsible for security can never take a vacation day from their jobs. Newly discovered vulnerabilities must be immediately stomped out, and those fixes must also be rapidly deployed. And we can see that today's web browser attackers themselves are hyper-vigilant. They know that they won't have much time to leverage any transient advantage that they might be able to briefly obtain. And finally, we learn that we should be so thankful that Microsoft had the wisdom to scrap their own independent web browser development in favor of their adoption of the Chromium project. Web browsers can no longer be the domain of massive, slow-moving, bureaucratic behemoths. Web browsers is no longer where Microsoft should be. Putting any modern web browser up for the world to attack requires far too much agility. Google has clearly optimized their Chromium group for short-cycle, nearly instantaneous response. And in an example like this, nothing less would be sufficient to protect Chrome users from today's attackers. So, we normally just sort of step back and look at the big major version changes, but I thought that this was really interesting to see just how quickly any instance of a vulnerability is jumped on. And it's not clear what percentage of vulnerabilities are being discovered themselves by the attackers and how many, like in this instance, they're able to allow other people to discover, and just as a consequence of timing uncertainty, are still able to create an attack window that is unfortunately useful to them. They clearly had other pieces of ammunition ready in order to create the chain. They already had those Windows 0 days, which got closed last week, yet they still needed a way to deploy them. And the second that Chrome surfaced a means by which they could, that got chained into an attack, and Kaspersky found their customers being victimized through that brief little window of opportunity. It's the world we're in today. Wow.
I think most attacks are chained like that these days.
Yeah, it's really rare. An example of one that isn't, for example, is a credential breach in RDP. We know that bad guys, in fact, this is how the attack against the attack that DarkSide used against Colonial Pipeline, we learned that it was almost certainly a credential for their VPN that was purchased on the dark web. And so there it was like this is the username and password? Great. Thank you very much. And they just logged right into the network.
It was just a highway. Drive right
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. But the what we're seeing is surprisingly sophisticated chain attacks.
Yeah, because that wasn't an exploit. That didn't take advantage of exploits.
Right.
That was just a breach,
That was actually a front door for which the keys had gotten loose.
But exploits it makes sense, increasingly chained, because one doesn't do it by itself. Right. But yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, and the reason one doesn't is that typically you do have layers of security. Mm-hmm. You've got first you're in the Chrome code, so you've got to somehow get out of the Chrome code. Then once you're out of the Chrome code, then you're still in the sandbox. Now you got to get out of the Chrome browser sandbox in order to have any contact with the operating system. Once you have contact with the operating system, you got to be able to do something nefarious with that. So now you need an elevation or privilege, not only to get out of the sandbox, but then to get into the kernel. And so it's a series of things you need. And what's often the case is that they have a toolkit of exploitable, potentially exploitable pieces where they're just waiting for like one more piece to fall into their lap, and then they can put them in a chain and go.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, layered security in response to layered attacks and vice versa. Mm-hmm. That makes sense, yeah. Exactly. And that's why it's so hard to defend, frankly.
Yes. And speaking of which, last Tuesday was the industry-wide Patch Tuesday. And as I noted last week...
You mean wider than Microsoft? Everybody's doing it now?
Exactly. As I noted last week, many other companies have decided to synchronize their patch cycles with Microsoft. And you kind of wonder, is it to hide? It's like everybody's doing it. Yeah.
Because I don't think it's ideal that you get a bunch of patches on a bunch of different things all at once. That's just a recipe for disaster.
Yeah. Intel, in this case, fixed 73 security vulnerabilities, which included some that were severe, impacting the UEFI BIOS firmware for their processors, as well as their Bluetooth products, their active management technology tools, which, as we know, runs down on the motherboard underneath everything else. That's the AMT stuff, and its NUC mini PC offerings, including some problems in its own security library. Among other things, in the security library, there was a problem with a random number generator not being as random as hoped. So I guess we how many years have we been talking about these problems, Leos, with insufficiently random random number generators?
At least since the show began.
Yeah,
that's why it's called a pseudo random number generator.
That's right.
Yeah.
So among those that were fixed, there were some rated critical, though. Interestingly, Intel boasted that most were found internally. Intel's Jerry Bryant, he's the guy who's their spokesman, and we've quoted him in the past. In this case, he said, "Today, we released 29 security advisories addressing 73 vulnerabilities. 40 of those, 73, or 55%, were found internally through our own proactive security research. Of the remaining 33 CVEs being addressed, 29, or 40%, were reported through our bug bounty program. Overall, 95% of the issues being addressed today were the result of our ongoing investments in security assurance, which is consistent with our 2020 product security report." To which I thought, that's right, Jerry. And if only you had found those problems before you deployed the buggy code into the wild, the world would not now need to scramble around to update our now known defective devices before the forces of darkness are able to reverse engineer those changes to use them against all of the unwitting. But I suppose better late than never. anyone using an Intel NUC, and I happen to be a big NUC fan, and I expect that's going to be my chosen platform moving forward, ought to check to see whether there's an update to their device's firmware waiting for them over at Intel. Intel doesn't appear to offer a firmware appraisal tool. I went looking for it yesterday, and there wasn't one that I could find. So you need to figure out which model of device you have. The good news is you can turn it over and look at its belly, and which firmware version it's running. You can actually do that through the Windows Management Instrumentation, the WMI stuff, which I did in order to get the BIOS version, or just reboot and see what it says as it's coming up, and then see whether you've got the latest available. Probably worth doing. By far the winner of this month's critical patch derby was Adobe, who addressed 41 CVEs in their own Patch Tuesday last week. 21 of them were rated critical in severity. They impacted Acrobat and Reader, Photoshop, Creative Cloud Desktop, their Robo Help Server, Adobe After Effects, and Adobe Animate. I know.
I'm liking this idea less and less. I mean, I've got Microsoft, Intel, and Adobe patches all coming in at the same time.
Just give up on Tuesday.
That's a nightmare. It's not good. And I know that things seem sort of gloomy in the software industry right now, but really, we should count our blessings that Adobe never decided to do an operating system. Yeah, no kidding.
Can you?
That's a silver lining. Yes.
They were never able to make Flash safe. So thank God we're not like some chunk of the industry doesn't have Adobe OS. That would, no. And speaking of operating systems, however, the original Second Tuesday patcher, Microsoft, managed to break last month's 16-month low mark, which last month was just 55 flaws, by coming in this month with only 50 or 51, depending upon how one counts. However, last month had only 3 0 days, and this month we have 6 exploits appearing in the wild. The vulnerabilities fixed span Windows Desktop, SharePoint Server, Windows Kernel, and Outlook. 2 of the vulnerabilities are related to a separate vulnerability in Acrobat Reader, for which Microsoft released fixes in its enhanced cryptographic provider. By leveraging those flaws, an attacker could elevate their privileges on the targeted system if they trick a user into opening a specially crafted PDF file using a vulnerable version of Acrobat or Reader from within a not yet patched version of Windows. So that got patched last week. Microsoft stated in its advisories that it's seen these vulnerabilities being exploited in the wild. In other words, they still work. Adobe had previously fixed this in its previous month's security update. So if you're using Acrobat or Reader, having both patched would be safest. That is to say, both Acrobat or Reader and Windows, because it's a combination. You need both. You need problems in both in order to get exploited. Fix them both. Again, layers are good. One of the critical vulnerabilities fixed this month was in the Windows Defender code base, which would have allowed an attacker to execute remote code on the host machine. The good news is that Defender is continually keeping itself up to date independently, even under Windows 7. Microsoft's Office MS Graph component also had a remote code execution vulnerability that could be used to deliver a malicious payload to a victim's machine through Microsoft Office, since the built-in MS Graph component can be embedded in most Office documents, which will then exploit the flaw when any one of those documents which has the MS Graph component embedded in it is opened. So, again, these are all ways that email, right? Phishing email can attack a user because they just do something that should be fine, but isn't. Yeah, it's just so wrong. Another vulnerability being actively exploited. These are all things like, these were all loose already, right? I mean, Windows users were being hurt by these things, these 6 different things that got fixed last Tuesday. In this case, there's a privilege escalation flaw or elevation in the DWM core library, which is what Microsoft calls it. DWM is the desktop Windows manager. It can be exploited by running an executable or script on the local machine. It has a CVSS of only 8.4, so it's bad. Microsoft only labeled it as important, even though, again, actively exploited in the wild. Oh, yeah, I think maybe you need to get that fixed. And finally, CVE 2021-31955, that's the flaw that I talked about before relative to Chrome. That's the flaw that allows an attacker to read the contents of the Windows OS kernel memory. They called it an information disclosure. I'd call it, game over. The kernel is the land of exploitable secrets. And Microsoft stated in their advisory that it has also been actively exploited in the wild. So, yeah, another Patch Tuesday and a few hundred overall, if you consider Intel, Adobe, and Microsoft, a few hundred fewer outstanding bugs in the software the world is using. That would be a hopeful sign, right? A few hundred fewer. If we didn't appear to be creating them anew at an even faster clip than we're eliminating them. I did know last week, and I didn't have a chance to get to it, but it was in one of those tabs that I had left open in Firefox and that I mentioned. And Leo, unlike you, being hip is not a designation I have ever, at any prior point in my life, laid claim to. I just never had that.
Nor I, Steve. Nor I.
No, I don't know. You're way hipper than I am. You know what a lot of this stuff is. all indications are that I'm headed in the other direction.
You and me both, bud.
Those who are hip will know that TikTok is a popular short-form video sharing service.
Oh, well, I'm that hip, yes.
See, okay, yeah.
I knew that.
Not I,
Okay.
Anyway, I'm sure that they're not happy that they recently made the tech news press due to a somewhat chilling explicit change in their service's privacy policy. Okay, now, stepping back a bit, there's some interesting backstory here. It's likely that the recent changes to their privacy policy followed from a $92 million settlement of a class action lawsuit. We've talked about the super tight Illinois Biometric Information Privacy Act, abbreviated BIPA, B-I-P-A. Illinois is where privacy lawsuits go to be filed, since BIPA, as we've previously covered extensively, pretty much takes no prisoners. In this case, the lawsuit was originally filed just over a year ago in May of 2020, and the group of plaintiffs in this suit, which was consolidated from more than 20 separate cases originally filed against TikTok, reached a preliminary settlement just before the end of this February. The suit alleges that TikTok violates BIPA, and boy does it, when it collected and shared the personal and biometric information of its users without first obtaining their consent. Attorney Equan Rowe, who is with the firm, and I had to read this a couple times, I kid you not, of Bird, Marella, Boxer, Walpert, Nessum, Drooks, Leisenberg, and Rowe.
That's my password.
That's right. They say use a bunch of words, string them together.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. That probably is one of their passwords.
I don't think they're in the dictionary, to be honest with you.
Boy. Anyway, Equan was quoted saying, This is one of the largest settlements ever achieved in a consumer BIPA case and one of the largest privacy class action settlements. It presents an excellent recovery for the class, and it serves as a reminder to corporations that privacy matters, and they will be held accountable for violating consumers' rights. Another attorney in the case, Beth Fagan, added, Illinois is on the cutting edge of privacy law, and this settlement enforces those crucial protections. Biometric information is among the most sensitive of private information. It's crucial that privacy and identity is protected by stalwart governance to guard against underhanded attempts at theft. And yeah, I'd love to know, and you and I, Leo, agree on this also, what portion of the settlement went to the members of the aggrieved class?
More than half, guaranteed. Yeah.
And what portion of those oh-so-concerned attorneys retained for themselves?
Yeah.
But that's beside the point. And although $92 million is an arresting sum, it's actually small potatoes when measured against Facebook's $650 million BIPA settlement.
Wow.
That $650 million settlement was arrived at only after the judge rejected the previous $550 million proposal, arguing that the smaller figure would not be enough to compensate the sheer number of people in the class, probably all Facebook users, based on the penalties laid out in the BIPA law. Okay, so, of course, this is not the first time TikTok has made the tech press news. They were also in legal hot water when the U.S. federal government was considering a ban on TikTok after privacy experts warned that the government of China might have access to personal information gathered through the app. Okay, but in any event, the recent settlement alleged that TikTok was using clandestinely captured biometric and personal data from users in the U.S. to target ads without meeting the informed consent requirements of Illinois' very rigid biometric state law, privacy enforcing state law regarding biometrics. And we've talked about, just how facial recognition BIP has been used to slam the door on that. So, as part of the settlement, TikTok agreed to avoid collecting or storing biometric information, biometric identifiers, geolocation, or GPS data unless expressly disclosed in its privacy policy, which, of course, fine print, who reads that? Okay, but still, we have TikTok's new privacy policy, which is what has garnered so much attention and concern. It says, we collect information about your approximate location, including location information based on your SIM card and or IP address. With your permission, we may also collect precise location data such as GPS. Then under image and audio information, they said, we may collect information about the images and audio that are part of your user content, such as identifying the objects and scenery that appear, the existence and location within an image or an image of face and body features and attributes, the nature of the audio, and the text of the words spoken in your user content. We may collect this information to enable special video effects, for content moderation, for demographic classification, for content and ad recommendations, and for other non-personally identifying operations. And finally, we may collect biometric identifiers and biometric information as defined under U.S. laws, such as face prints and voice prints, from your user content. Where required by law, we will seek any required permissions from you prior to any such collection. So TikTok is now finally formally disclosing what they weren't before, thus the BIPA class action, which cost them $92 million, that they were presumably doing, collecting biometric information, and then they say such as, but apparently also not limited to, face prints and voice prints. And it should escape no one that the whole point of biometrics, that is, the metrics of the bio, is identification. Again, not new information, but now this is out of the shadows. And given that only 5 states in the U.S. currently, that's California, Illinois, New York, Texas, and Washington, have laws which restrict the collection of biometric data, the updated privacy disclosure likely means that TikTok will not be required to obtain explicit permission from its users in all the other states of the U.S. In other words, users are consenting to have their biometric data collected simply by agreeing to TikTok's terms of service, which most users are just going to say, yeah, whatever, too. So maybe they don't care. The onus is on the user, of course, to decide what, to know what it is they're agreeing to. On the other hand, that brings us to something else that happened recently that we have not yet had a chance to talk about, and that's iOS 14.5. Speaking of users explicitly agreeing to things, one of the changes which has been made in iOS 14.5 was it required apps to obtain explicit tracking permission from their users. It added the provision and the requirement for any apps wishing to track their users' activity across other companies' apps and websites to expressly request and obtain such permission. Overall, the feedback has been a resounding no thanks. The application analytics company Flurry has been sampling 2.5 million users since the release of iOS 14.5. Their research has shown that the worldwide global opt-into tracking rate has settled at about 25%. In other words, 75% of users globally are saying, oh, I have a choice, then no thank you. And users in the United States are even more tracking shy. For the U.S., the it's okay, go ahead and track me rate has settled out at around 14%. In other words, 86% of U.S. users want to see tracking 86th from their online experiences. So it's good, Leo, with the anti-tracking stovepiping, which Firefox is doing, with Google's moves to sort of, to move from third-party tracking to Flock, and with Flock having such problems, I wonder if ultimately this thing, the whole tracking-ness, is going to go by the wayside. It's just going to have been sort of an upheaval that we went through because it happened when we weren't looking. It happened because people couldn't really see it. But then some companies started making, privacy and non-tracking a feature. Users decided, we don't want it. And then when they were, when they were asked, they said no. So if you ask, then it's going to fail.
Well,
right?
and of course, Apple's new iCloud Plus relay system is very much privacy forward. I think these companies are hearing consumers say, we don't want tracking. the thing that I think is important to note is what Google and others are doing is eliminating third-party tracking. But at no point has Google said, well, we're not going to track you. Google first-party tracking, in my opinion, all it does is say that the only kind of tracking will be first-party tracking, which means companies like Facebook, Google, Apple, Microsoft all will have a huge dominant position going forward because no one can compete with them. But they will continue. You know, that's why Spotify is buying podcast companies, because you can't track in a podcast unless you own the app, and then you can do first-party tracking. If you think you watch stuff on YouTube and Google's not paying attention to what you watch, or you look at videos on TikTok and TikTok's not paying attention to what you watch, you're missing how this stuff works. That's how it works.
Yep.
So I don't think tracking's going away. I think third-party tracking is going away. And I don't know if that's exactly the result people intend, because all it does is entrenches the incumbents. And that's not what you want either, I don't think.
So let's take our second break, and then we're going to talk about this amazing ANOM sting that the FBI in Australia.
Would. Yeah.
Wow.
It's a really great story, I think. Fascinating story. Which may have a terrible punchline, but I'm sure you'll get to that as well. Our show today brought to you by Extra Hop. SolarWinds, the sunburst attack, was really a wake-up call for people. The Exchange server attacks. One of the things people are realizing is not only are cyber attacks more advanced and harder to detect, but the real threat comes from an actor who has now gained entry and is wandering around on your network undetected. I mean, that's what happened with the Exchange server. They patched the Exchange server flaws, I guess, 7 so far, but that does nothing to remove the attacker. When bad guys get past your defenses, businesses have to have a plan for detection and response. You know, of course you want to keep them out. But how do you know they're not already in? The old model of protection and prevention alone is not sufficient. You need Extra Hop Reveal X. It's the only solution that shows you not just where intruders are going, but where they have been, so you can investigate incidents and prevent them from turning into full-blown breaches. When cyber attacks make the news, the first question I ask, security teams need to ask is, have we been compromised? Right? Not, oh, how do we fix this hole so nobody else can get in? But have they already gotten in? Extra Hop Reveal X makes it super simple to answer that question. 90 days of record look back. That's awesome. Complete network visibility across everywhere, the data center, the cloud, even down to the device edge, so you can get real answers to your security team in seconds. In a post-compromised world, that's a phrase I hoped we'd never hear. But that's the world we live in. In a post-compromised world, your greatest chance of stopping advanced threats is with Extra Hop's network detection and response, their NDR product. Look, I'm not going to be able to give you all the details. You should check it out. There's a great demo for you, an interactive demo. Extra Hop does a whole bunch of stuff, but you want to see this in person. extrahop.com/security now. You'll find out how Extra Hop stops breaches 84% faster, how Extra Hop lets you find the bad guys already inside. extrahop.com/security now. Great company, great product. And at the very least, do yourself a favor, check out the demo. extrahop.com/security now. We thank him for supporting Steve and the show. extrahop.com/security now. Steve Arino.
So, the news of ANOM was breaking just as we were recording last week's podcast.
And this is something, by the way, I just want to give you credit, because we were talking about this on MacBreak Weekly. I don't know if you heard, but everybody jumps on these things so that they can get the hits, right? Even if we don't know what happened, even if they're going to make up something that's not true. But I give you a lot of credit. Resist that temptation and do the research before we start talking about something like this. And I really appreciate you doing it. And of course, details emerge over time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So today, I'm able to provide a comprehensive description of this classic, though quite high-tech sting operation. Europol's press release of last Tuesday, the 8th, was headlined 800 criminals arrested in biggest ever law enforcement operation against encrypted communication. So the ANOM sting operation, which was known as Operation Trojan Shield by the U.S. Federal Bureau of Investigation, our FBI, and it was called Operation Ironside by the AFP. That's the Australian Federal Police. It was a collaboration by law enforcement agencies from as many as 20 countries. It ran from late 2018, when it got off the ground, through just now, 2021. And during that time, the operation intercepted and exploited the intelligence obtained through 27 million messages. Imagine just processing 20,
Wow.
reading 27 million messages. You know, you want to be like handing them out. Here's your 10,000 for today. Have your staff take a look at them, and here you a different country law enforcement, you take this 10,000 and let us know if you find anything. So the messages were sent through and intercepted by the supposedly secure smartphone-based messaging app ANOM. The ANOM service, which was widely used by criminals, was actually a Trojan horse covertly distributed by the U.S. FBI and the Australian Federal Police, the AFP. It enabled them to monitor all communications taking place across the network. And finally, through collaboration with other law enforcement agencies worldwide, the operation resulted in the arrest, as I said, and as that headline said, of over 800 subjects allegedly involved in criminal activity across 16 different countries. Among the arrested people were alleged members of Australian-based Italian mafia, Albanian organized crime, outlaw motorcycle gangs, drug syndicates, and other organized crime groups. At its height, the ANOM service grew to a service of more than 12,000 encrypted devices being held by over 300 criminal syndicates operating across more than 100 countries. The platform's goal was to target deliberately. I mean, this whole thing was deliberately created, and I'll get to that in a second. Its goal was to target global organized crime, drug trafficking, and money laundering organizations, regardless of where they operated. And very cleverly, the service was designed to appeal to what the underworld wanted by offering an encrypted device with features sought by the organized crime networks, including things like remote wipe and duress passwords. We've talked about those before. Duress passwords are those which could be given when a bad guy is under duress, which would have the opposite of the intended effect. It would wipe rather than unlock a device. So, you can just see them rubbing their hands together. It's like, oh, goody, this has the features that we need. These features gradually persuaded criminal networks to adopt the device, thus the way it became so widespread. And the way this happened is the stuff of spy novels. First, the shutdown of the Canadian secure messaging platform Phantom Secure in early 2018 left international criminals who were using it in need of an alternative system for secure communication. And around the same time, the FBI branch office in San Diego, California, was working with a person who had been developing his own next-generation encrypted device for use by criminal networks. That individual had been nabbed and was facing charges, so he cooperated with the FBI in exchange for a reduced sentence. He offered to develop ANOM and to then distribute it to the underworld through their existing networks with which he was familiar. The first communication devices with ANOM were offered by this informant to 3 former distributors of that now shut down Phantom Secure system starting around October of 2018. So that's when this all began to get off the ground. The FBI also negotiated with an unnamed third country to set up a communication interception, but based on a court order that allowed passing the information back to the FBI.
That's because the FBI is restricted on how it can collect information on U.S. citizens.
Exactly.
This is a real backdoor to that,
exactly.
Which pisses me off, but okay.
Yes. Since October 2019, ANOM communications have been passed on to the FBI by this third country, exactly as you said, Leo, to get around our own laws. During the culmination of ANOM's operation, a series of large-scale law enforcement actions were executed. That's what just happened a week ago across 16 countries, resulting in more than 700 residential searches, more than 800 arrests, and the seizure of over 8 tons of cocaine, 22 tons of cannabis and cannabis resin, 2 tons of synthetic drugs, amphetamine and methamphetamine, 6 tons of synthetic drug precursors, 250 firearms, 55 luxury vehicles, and over $48 million in various worldwide currencies and cryptocurrencies. And innumerable spin-off operations are still planned for the weeks to come.
The reason this all happened at once is I think that the jig was up, right? Somebody tipped them that these ANOM phones weren't secure, and so they had to roll up the network.
Right.
Yeah.
And you'd have to do the whole thing at once.
All at once, yeah.
Yes. So Wikipedia had some interesting background information about the ANOM devices. Wikipedia said the ANOM devices consisted of a messaging app running on smartphones that had been specially modified to disable normal functions such as voice telephony, email, or location services. After checking that normal functionality was disabled, the messaging apps then communicated with one another via supposedly secure proxy servers, which then copied all sent messages to servers controlled by the FBI. The FBI could then decrypt the messages with a private key associated with the message without ever needing remote access to the devices. The devices also had a fixed identification number assigned to each user, allowing messages from the same user to be connected to that user. According to a since deleted Reddit post discovered by Motherboard, the ANOM app was for Android. A WordPress blog post described the app as using a custom Android OS.
That makes sense. What else are you going to use? Yeah.
Yeah. About 50 devices were distributed in Australia for beta testing from October 2018. The intercepted communications showed that every device was used for criminal activities, primarily being used by organized criminal gangs. Use of the app spread through word of mouth and was also encouraged by undercover agents. Drug trafficker Hakan Aik was identified, quote, as someone who was trusted and was going to be able to successfully distribute this platform, and without his knowledge was encouraged by undercover agents to use and sell the devices on the black market, further expanding its use. After users of the devices requested smaller and newer phones, hey, Rev 2,
hey, yo,
newer device.
This phone is really big. You got an iPhone, man? I don't know why I'm using this big old thing. Huh? You know, the best part is they charged him $2,000 every 6 months to use the phone, which is
beautiful,
right?
Brilliant. Yeah.
Don't give them away because then people might not trust them. Oh, I paid $2,000 for this. It must be something.
It must be some deep crypto in
good
these
stuff
things.
On here, man.
That's right. This is really uncrackable.
Oh, uncrackable. It's expensive.
Interestingly, the most commonly used languages on the app were Dutch, German, and Swedish.
Oh, interesting. Huh.
So after a slow start, writes Wikipedia, the rate of distribution of ANOM increased from mid-2019. By October 2019, there were several hundred users. By May 2021, a month ago, there had been 11,800 devices with ANOM installed, of which about 9,000 were in active use. New Zealand had 57 users of the ANOM communication system. The Swedish police had access to conversations from 1,600 users, of which they focused their surveillance on 600. Europol stated 27 million messages were collected from ANOM devices across those 100 countries. And then their article concludes, some skepticism of the app did exist. One March 2021 WordPress blog post called the app a scam. And Leo, that may be something like what you're referring to, where people were beginning to say, really?
Yeah.
And anyway, I would call it a significant success.
Notably, the guy you mentioned, the Turkish drug lord who really spurred the growth of this, has not been arrested. He's living apparently in a life of a lavish lifestyle, I think is what the Australian police said in Istanbul. And I guess because he's in Turkey, they can't arrest him. But very wise, the AFP says, Hakan, everybody thinks you set them up. It might be wise to turn yourself in now, because either we're going to get you or they're going to get you. So we'll see. I have to say, though, it does raise the issue of why authorities want backdoors in devices. I mean, this is a gold mine for them, and that's immediately in Australia, more laws were passed to encourage backdoors in encryption because
as we have, I mean, that's one of the big focuses on the podcast is the question, what's going to happen with this?
I think this is a big PR victory for the AFP and the FBI. I think that's really what this is mostly about. But we'll see. Let's watch the prosecutions. I mean, if a lot of this is pot, come on, man. It's actually legal in many states of the United States.
Yeah, and of course the reason for the success, I'm sure our listeners already got this, is that this was distributed explicitly to criminal gangs,
right?
And every message, every transaction was being monitored. That's not something that our FBI could do under any circumstances in the United States. The most that I can see happening is that the equivalent of a search warrant, a highly targeted search warrant under, where a judge, hopefully a judge with judgment, agrees that there is probable cause to believe that something wrong is going on, and so selective decryption or tapping, very much like like an old school phone tap, right? Where the FBI says we need to bring up a phone tap on these people because we need information that we have reason to believe we will get there, not we're going to monitor every conversation of everyone in the country, which, within the much smaller ANOM group is what was happening. So it's going to be really interesting to see how this shakes out.
Yeah, no kidding.
So, Errata. Windows 10?
Never.
The last Windows ever?
Yeah.
Apparently not.
No.
I was absolutely certain that we were clearly and formally told by representatives of Microsoft,
yes, I know,
that following Windows 8.1, the next Windows, to be called 10, would be free, would create, and remember this, new revenue opportunities for Microsoft. In other words, that users of this next Windows would become profit centers themselves for Microsoft, and that it would be the last version of Windows ever.
We've all been saying that. Right?
Yes.
Over and over.
And I was stunned last week during Windows Weekly in her conversation with you,
Yeah,
Leo,
yeah.
and Paul, when Mary Jo Foley said, nope, Microsoft never said that. And so I put this under errata since
Jerry said it.
this-
Jerry said it.
Exactly. Since if I'd been spreading an unfounded rumor, at least I wasn't alone.
No, I
In
said
fact,
it too many, many, many times.
And
you probably
and
got it
Rich
from
Wo-
me.
Yeah, well, that's what we all believed. Rich Woods of XDA Developers, he tweeted on the 11th last week. He said, the most mind-blowing news story from this week was broken by @Mary Jo Foley on Windows Weekly.
Oh, thanks, Rich.
And it's that Microsoft never said Windows 10 was the last version of Windows. One developer evangelist said it. Microsoft never corrected it, and everyone ran with it. It became lore, wrote Rich.
I said it on the radio all the time, so I guess I'm going to have to do an errata too. Thank you. You're right.
So
Error.
it turns out that back in 2015, Microsoft's developer evangelist Jerry Nixon stated that Windows 10 was the last version of Windows. Quoting him exactly, he said, quote, "Right now, we're releasing Windows 10. And because Windows 10 is the last version of Windows, we're all still working on Windows 10. In other words, he said that we're releasing it and we're still working on it, clearly implying that Windows 10 would be an ongoing effort. And indeed, that's what we've seen. It would be difficult to say with a straight face, however, that this has all gone smoothly. What with Windows 10 2004 being released in 2010. What? Anyway, what a mess. Last Wednesday, Mary Jo Foley explained that Microsoft themselves never publicly said in plain language that Windows 10 is the last version of the Windows operating system. Their developer evangelist, Jerry Nixon, said it and backed it up with evidence at the time. And as Mary Jo noted, Microsoft's PR team never denied it. So they didn't. So it said no one said he was wrong. Maybe they thought it was the last.
You could
one.
even
Who knows?
read, though, now that I'm reading the actual quote, you could even read that like the latest version of Windows. Like it's not necessarily, it's not explicitly we're never releasing another version.
True.
It's the last version of Windows. Well, it is. It's the last version of Windows, right? I mean, it is
So far.
still the last version of Windows. Not the last of all ever, just the latest, as in last as in latest. So I'm not even sure Microsoft realized that he had said something that people would interpret that way. So I don't know how, but this is very common in our industry, in any
And
industry.
Leo, it may have just been, we're just so tired that we were hoping it was true.
We want it to be.
Please,
We all
God,
want it to
please,
be the last
just
ever.
please stop the madness.
That's why it took off, because we all wanted it to be the last version. I think that's exactly what happened. We were hoping it was the last version.
Oh, does this mean what I think it means?
I don't think, and by the way, if you listen to that show, you heard Paul, Mary Jo, and I talk about what Windows 11 is going to be, and none of the things you and I would like it to be, which is more secure, more reliable, rewritten from the ground up, all of that, it's just going to be a nice thin glaze on top of the old donut.
Apparently, if by mistake you bump into the corner of a window, it will no longer draw blood.
Yeah, that's it. That's exactly right. No sharp corners.
Yep.
It's a child-proofed version of Windows. It looks very Mac-like, according to the releases that have come out in the last
Well,
day.
good. I like the way the Mac looks.
Yeah,
That's
it's pretty.
Could use with a little bit of an upgrade.
Yeah.
I did want to follow up once again, real briefly, on Project Hail Mary. Lori loved the book.
Oh, good.
She blew through it, as I knew she would. At one point, she was standing, I just had the chuckle, she was standing in front of the stove reading the book with it open in front of her as popcorn was popping.
See, that's why I do audiobooks. I invariably pop my popcorn listening to an audiobook. I completely with her on that.
Yeah. So, and I will say because she's just such a dear heart, she got a little choked up at the end.
Oh, yes.
With
Very
the
touching.
way everything turned out. I thought, oh, honey, that's cute. So,
but actually, Lisa had the same reaction, loved it, and she said, "Give me another one like this."
I know.
What do you suggest?
Well, and this is you perfect segue. I wrote in my notes, seeing that she loved it so much, I gave her the first of the Honor Harrington books. But after a couple of hours, she asked whether the entire book would be about military space ordnance.
By the way.
And I said,
yes.
Yeah, there's a lot of that.
It's not a woman.
So now,
not a woman's sci-fi book, I don't think.
No. So now she's reading Daniel Suarez's Demon.
Good choice.
And that one may be a hit.
I think so.
She is. She did. She's read enough of it that last night she said, "This is creepy."
Yeah.
And I said, yeah.
The thing that Lisa likes about Andy Weir's books, both The Martian and Hail Mary, is the humor, the humanity of it.
Yes.
And I've been trying. And I thought maybe the Ringworld series by Larry Niven, but she said no, it's too old. I want something newer. So I said maybe Peter F. Hampton's Fallen Dragon, but I think it's a little dry. I think she wants something more human scale. So I'm open to any suggestions for her. Something recent.
And Hitchhikers is too slapstick.
Yeah, I don't know if she'd like that. Yeah. I know what she likes because it's the thing about Hail Mary is very similar to The Martian in the sense that the protagonist has this great wry style and sense of humor. Very much that sense of humor is what she likes. And
what about Artemis in the middle?
Artemis is good. I think she gave up on it. She tried it. Didn't like it. Yeah.
Huh. Yeah, I'm the same way. I don't know of anything else like that. Normally, sci-fi is, well, I mean, there's like New York Times bestseller sci-fi. I read something awful. I can't even remember now what it was.
It's always got lurid covers with, monsters wrapped tentacles around buxom women and stuff. It's not good.
It's not good.
It's not good. Actually, Stacey Higginbotham has recommended a series that I just bought on Amazon. I'll let you know. You might like it. I think, unfortunately, there's a considerable amount of space ordnance in it, which means you and I will enjoy it. But I don't know if it's for everyone. Let me see if I can find the name of that series because she really thought it was good.
Well, and of course Suarez's Demon is not about that at all. It's on Earth, and it's like creepy possible future.
It's so fast moving and fun and just wonderful. Yeah. She recommended it's by Arkady Martine. And it's a series, the first book of which is called A Memory Called Empire. And the series is the Tex Calon series. But just remember Arkady Martine. She's written by a woman.
Lori may have never read the Foundation series.
See, I think that's wonderful. And I know Lisa hasn't, but she'll say it's too old. And
gosh.
I know.
Well, and it's going to be, have you seen the previews of what's coming from?
Oh, no.
Oh, the Foundation previews?
Oh, I'm going to go look at those as soon as the show's
Leo.
over.
It's.
Now, have you read it recently? Because I think, as great as that series is,
I need to reread it.
It may feel a little dated. Somebody told me that. They went back. This is not unusual. You go back to old sci-fi.
Yeah.
And times have changed a little bit. Heinlein's a really good example of that, where it just feels dated. So I don't know. Bob, I'm going to go watch those. That's great.
Okay, so I think our listeners will find this interesting. A colleague of Lori's had his laptop stop booting. It contained irreplaceable data. Of course, old story that had not been backed up.
Of course.
He had a whole bunch of EEGs which had been recorded and were there. His PhD thesis, and it wouldn't boot. So, he and Lori were chatting, and she said, send it. Steve will take a look at it. And
wow, that was nice of
course,
her.
I was happy to.
Oh, good.
And so it was actually 3 weeks ago today, because it arrived on a Monday, and so I brought it with me here on Podcast Tuesday, and it was sitting right here to my left, and I had turned it on in the morning when I was still working on the podcast, and it came up. Everything looked good. I got the little 3D, blue Windows thing. It had Windows 10. Oh, it was a Lenovo, a P51S.
Oh, that's a nice
So
laptop. That's a good, solid laptop.
Yes, it was absolutely beautiful, solid laptop.
Yeah.
And so I got the little spinning white dots, the little roller coaster dots, and they spun a while, and then it came up with that unhappy smiley face or frowny face with an error I'd never seen before. WHEA uncorrectable error.
Oy.
And I thought, oh, okay. So then it said, don't worry, we're going to fix this for you. And so it rebooted itself, and it went into the automatic repairing Windows. And it did that for a while. Then it came up and said, could not fix your problem. Try recovering your drive. And so now I got the screen where you had multiple options of restoring from a system, restore, uninstalling recent updates, backing up to an image that had been made, those sorts of things. And I forgot, I had Googled WHEA uncorrectable error. And of course, as Mr. SpinRite, uncorrectable sounds like a sector, right? I didn't know, but Googling didn't produce anything definitive. For example, Microsoft was saying, this could be caused by a recent update, so back out of any updates. So I thought, well, okay. So I tried that. Wouldn't work. I tried uninstalling. Nothing succeeded. Very quickly, when I tried any of those things, it said, can't do. So I thought, okay, what are my BIOS options? Rebooted the system. It had diagnostics built in. So I thought, so ran the diagnostics, and everything except the mass storage, the storage entry, it failed. It failed read tests. And so I thought, okay, well, that sounds like the hard drive is having problems. So yeah. So then I booted my little Ubuntu Linux in order to...
Oh, you're just warming the cockles of my heart there. You got that little USB key with Linux on it.
And it's got a nice persistent file system. So I'm able to install other things on it and sort of, build up a tool set over time.
So it's not the standard installer disk, the live boot CD. You actually made it a real Linux system on there. Nice.
Correct. And in fact, I was, because I'm still sort of a newbie, I stumbled around doing that. And for anyone who's interested in following along, the latest Rufus has a slider on it where you're able to slide how much space you want to make persistent store, and it does all the work for you.
Nice.
When it sets up a bootable thumb drive. So after trying to manually create a file system 3 or 4 times, and it's it kind of didn't work, or it took too long or something, I stumbled on Rufus, and it's you just slide the thing from the left where it's no persistent storage. You slide it over to, I think I cut it in half. So because it was a 32 gig thumb drive, I made it 16 gig of persistent store, and it works perfectly. It's just an overlay. It's an overlay file system.
So you actually are using the live CD ISO.
Yes.
You're not installing it on the key, because that's what I would have done, is just run the Linux installer, and instead of installing it on a hard drive, install it on the USB key. But you're actually using the live CD with some storage, because normally it's a read-only volume.
Exactly.
Oh, interesting. What a good idea.
It's really cool, and Rufus makes it full GUI. Just click here. Yep. Thank you very much.
Rufus.ie, a really good product. Free, nice, really does a good job.
and it's being maintained continually. I don't use it often, and typically it sees that there's a newer version of it and says, "Hey, you might as well use that one." I go, "Oh, okay." And you don't even install it. It's an exe. It's like one of my.
It's like
things,
one of yours.
It's
probably written in assembler.
Okay, so actually it's not. It's open source, and I did look at some of its source when I was working on SpinRite's AHCI controller AHCI driver to see if there was anything I could learn from it, and I ended up, or maybe it was I think it was when I was working on the USB boot stuff. Because Rufus is also a formatter, but it turns out mine is able to fix some thumb drives that Rufus still won't install on.
Oh, so that's also good to know.
Okay. In any event,
yes.
The SmartMon tool stuff, it turns out, isn't useful for NVMe. So you need to load an NVMe command that isn't normally part of the Ubuntu set. So I did that, and I was able to look at the NVMe drive, but it still seemed it was having some problems. So open up the laptop, take out the little NVMe. It was a nice Samsung OEM NVMe. I stuck it into an NVMe to PCIe adapter and put it in a different machine. Booted that up in Linux, and it could see it. Oh, I also stuck it into an NVMe to USB adapter and plugged it into my Windows 7 machine. Up it came, showing the drive looking fine. It showed 3 partitions, the UEFI boot partition. In the big middle was the C drive with BitLocker. So it was BitLocker encrypted, and then at the very end was the WinPE, the recovery partition. So the drive hadn't died, or at least didn't look like it had a problem. Looked like it was okay. So it's like, oh, okay. So, but I couldn't do anything with it because, of course, it was BitLocker encrypted. And this laptop was secure boot, BitLocker encrypted. It apparently came from Lenovo with Windows 10 installed and, secure boot and BitLocker. So that was a problem because I did have some dialogue asking whether he had the backup key, the BitLocker recovery key. It uses a certificate
system for encryption. And if you don't back that up,
Yes, and it, because it uses TPM, it was tied to that hardware.
That's right.
So only being in that laptop would allow BitLocker to decrypt. I asked him if do you had paperwork come with it? Because I figured if Lenovo gave him a laptop that had BitLocker already enabled, they would have printed out that it's a 48-digit BitLocker recovery key, which you need in order to decrypt a BitLocker partition. If you don't if it's not in the native machine that it came from. Anyway, he was absolutely sure he didn't have it. I said, okay, what about OneDrive? Because one thing that happens is if you log into OneDrive, Windows 10 is supposed to back up the BitLocker recovery key to your OneDrive. He looked, it wasn't there. I said, what about an earlier, because this was now 2018, how about earlier? He checked a different Microsoft account, also no BitLocker keys. So he was absolutely sure he didn't have it anywhere. Okay, meanwhile, I ran to get a sense for the condition of the drive. I then ran the dd command in Linux using dev null as the output. So basically, it just did a read scan of the entire NVMe. It was a 1 terabyte Samsung NVMe. I set the block size to 16 megabytes because that's a good size, and it read through the entire thing without error. So plugged into that other machine,
that's good.
Booted Linux. Yeah, it's absolutely good. Booted Linux worked fine without error. So Linux is saying, just from a simple read scan,
hardware's good.
Hardware is good. There is no problem with this drive.
Yeah.
And plugged into the USB adapter, my Windows 7 machine said, yeah, I see 3 partitions. The middle one's BitLocker. That's going to be a problem unless you've got the key, but we're okay. So it's seen like, the boot sector and all that stuff is there. So I think, okay, plug it back into the laptop. Doesn't work. Go to the diagnostics. He did not have the latest BIOS. I updated his BIOS on the laptop. It gave me much better diagnostics than it was originally shipped with, more detailed and many more tests. And again, would not pass a read test. It failed on the reads. And then there were some other tests of just the NVMe itself, and it passed, but it would not read. So then I thought, okay, so maybe the NVMe slot has died. So I took a different NVMe drive, plugged it in, works perfectly. So this drive works fine elsewhere. Another NVMe drive in the laptop, it works fine, but this drive and the laptop won't work together.
I have a feeling I know where the end game is on this one. Go ahead.
So here's the problem.
Yeah.
He needs the data.
Yeah.
It's BitLocker encrypted.
Yeah.
He's sure that the recovery key doesn't exist anywhere.
You got to get this drive working. There's just no way around it.
Got to get the drive working. And the only instance of the key known to exist is in the Trusted Platform module on the motherboard. And,
you have to get it working on that P51. There's
exactly.
no way around it.
Exactly.
Well,
and
I know what I would do.
And so the only thing I could think was that, like, how do you explain this weird drive behavior?
Yeah.
Is that something bad happened, like age, just an age-related problem where the signal levels of that is being generated.
Maybe just one cell. Just one cell.
Well, or a signal line is a little bit out of spec, such that this drive, like this drive and this particular interface chip in the laptop are no longer talking to each other.
Interesting.
A different drive, no problem, and it in a different machine, no problem, but not those two.
Yeah, because that WHE error is a Windows hardware error, so. That's why you would think, well, there's a hardware problem here.
Right.
That's interesting.
Right. And so what was happening was the drive was just going offline. It was not passing its diagnostics.
You can't talk to me. Yeah.
So I told him, I said, look, talk to Lenovo. If it came from them, maybe they have a record of the BitLocker recovery key that, you'll have to prove that it's, your ownership and so forth in order to get them to do that. So he spent a lot of time on the phone.
Sure,
they instructed him to take it to one of their partners, and one of their corporate partner companies, someone not really even a consumer company. And so I was getting ready to pack it up, and I said, there's one more thing I want to try. It probably won't work, but I've got to rule it out. This other little piece of hardware is coming tomorrow. I'm going to see if it does the job. Because I had a Thunderbolt 3 port. And I remembered that Thunderbolt, and we talked about this on the podcast. Yes. Thunderbolt is actually the PCIe bus. It is a hybrid of the PCIe bus and DisplayPort. And, of course, what's happened with PCIe is the reason we went to from PCI to PCIe is that interconnect became too expensive. As more stuff was happening, it no longer made sense to have you couldn't have a 64-bit address bus on a 64-bit system and a 64-bit data bus. That would be 128 bits of individual wires. So we went from a parallel bus architecture to a serial bus architecture, where now, instead of putting a whole bunch of things on a bus, you flip it over and you make the bus be serial, and you then have a one-to-one relationship between the processor chip and each individual device in the system. Well, the Thunderbolt port is one of those. Amazon delivered a Thunderbolt 3 to NVMe case, and the first one I ordered was wrong because it worked on USB. So the second one, I had to make sure, and they did say, this will not work on USB. It looks like USB 3. It's not USB 3.
Good.
It's Thunderbolt.
Good
so
idea.
that's like, yes,
That's what I want.
that's the one I'm trying.
Yes.
I put it in the case, I plugged it in, and it booted.
So your diagnosis was something wrong with that NVMe slot, that
Yes.
M.2 slot, timing
Yes.
on the pins. So putting in an external connected NVMe reader on the PCIe bus,
Because that's Thunderbolt.
TPM would still say, oh, I recognize that.
It recognized
It
the
decrypted
drive.
it?
Yep.
And you were able
And
to read
booted
it.
Yes.
Unbelievable. What a story. See, I thought you were going with SpinRite. You were going to SpinRite the thing, but it really was a hardware error.
It was a hardware error. The drive was fine. They just wouldn't talk to each other on that connector.
That is bizarre.
Yeah. And I said to him, I said, frankly,
You're lucky.
yeah.
You're lucky I exist is what he should say. No one else is going to solve that. No.
Oh.
That's a great story, Steve. Boy, he is really lucky he knows you because...
Well, and of course, the first thing I did, I made an image of it because it was like this data was so crucial.
Yeah.
I made an image of it. He was desperate for some of it, so I installed the remote utilities and let him access it remotely to pull the files off that he needed.
Wow.
Then after I had an image safely, I removed BitLocker, which, just to get rid of it because thank you anyway, this is too important. And I ended up shipping, I called it the sidecar. Because it was running a little warm, I glued some
heat sinks, some nice copper heat sinks on there.
Some nice copper heat sinks to the top of the case.
You're such a geek. Wow.
Because he was going to be using it from now on.
Oh, really? I guess he has to, right? He can't fix that laptop.
Well, maybe he could put a different NVMe drive in, but I wouldn't trust it. I would never trust it again.
No.
So he has the laptop, and he's also not financially constrained. So he could instantly he'll get a nice Carbon X1 or who knows what.
Lenovo should fix that though. The problem is proving to them that your obviously correct diagnosis is what's going on. That's
at this
just
point
amazing.
It's old and it's time. But so anyway, he has it back. It's got its cute little now basically the drive has been externalized.
Yeah.
So and boy is it fast.
Sure.
That's another
it's
lesson.
40 gigabits.
It's running at the full speed of this drive.
Yeah, I love Thunderbolt. That's amazing.
Yeah. So what I told him is use it like this as long as you want to. You'll have to keep them together wherever they go. Eventually,
you're gonna look
when
a little
you do
weird.
replace the laptop. And then what's cool is you plug this in to another laptop that also has a Thunderbolt 3 interface, and you'll just be able to copy the stuff over and to migrate yourself to a new laptop. So. Anyway, a cool story, which I thought you and
wonderful story,
yeah.
And kudos to you. He's lucky because basically you're a hard drive wizard. I would never have thought of that being there's a timing issue on the pinout. That's remarkable. But you did all. Had you already ordered that M.2 external, or you ordered it because you thought this might be the solution?
I ordered it because I just thought, Thunderbolt we got Thunderbolt and it's a PCIe.
Yep.
Maybe it'll fool the laptop into thinking,
it's an internal drive.
In.
Yeah.
Yep.
So it booted to it and everything.
Booted right up. Didn't even complain. When I saw the little thing spinning, I thought, okay, well, here comes the blue screen. And instead, I got the blurry logon screen. It's like,
It worked.
And he was actually in tears. He got choked up on the phone with me. He was in
saved
tears
his
with
life.
Lori because it was his PhD thesis was there.
Yeah.
A whole bunch of irreplaceable biomedical data was there. So
He's very, very lucky that you were the guy he brought it to. No one would have gotten that. That's wild. That's a great story. Bravo.
Really cool.
Golf clap. Would you like to take a break?
Oh, I'm going to do that.
That was exhausting. I'm exhausted just listening.
Talk about TLS collision attacks.
What a story. I mean, that is really incredible. I might have to tell that on the Tech Guy. That is just an incredible story. Thing is, when I do, because I have to answer questions like this on the radio frequently, is I store away the knowledge that that's even possible. I would not have thought that pinout could somehow, some little issue with the pinout on the motherboard and that stock M.2 drive made it unreadable over time.
They just stopped liking each other.
That's a bizarre error.
Yeah.
But now it's in my mind, and if that happens again, I'll keep that in mind. That is wild.
I guess the takeaway for our listeners,
back up.
If you're make sure you have BitLocker, the BitLocker recovery key, check right now. And I will absolutely be setting him up with Sync. He had something. He was like selectively using Dropbox and OneDrive, but not ubiquitously. Yeah. And for
would you
what
give him
it's worth,
Sync or Sync.com? What do you think you'd use?
I don't,
because he's got HIPAA requirements. I mean, if there's X-rays on there, things like that.
True.
He's got a requirement. That's probably why I bet you he turned on BitLocker. I doubt Lenovo ships with BitLocker on, but.
That would be interesting to know. He says it's not something he ever did, but he's
that was
also
years ago. He might not have remembered.
Yeah, it was a long time ago.
Yeah.
I wanted to remind our listeners that I'm still loving Sync. I use Sync and I use SyncThing separately.
Right.
grc.sc/sync, SYNC. That is a referral link which will get you an extra gig. Rather than 5, you get 6 if you use that link, grc.sc/sync, SYNC. If you want to play with it, it perfectly keeps my multiple locations synchronized. The reason I like it is that it's also in the cloud and it does versioning, like infinite versioning.
And it's TNO.
Yes,
Trust
it is.
No one. End-to-end encrypted.
Is. Trust no one, encrypted locally. They can't get to it, HIPAA compliant, and you're able to generate links for things you want to share, which allow other people to get to have the decryption occur at their end on the fly. So very cool.
I'm signing up.
And Leo,
right now.
before I forget about it, I just got a note from a Twitter follower who told me that SyncThing, the different peer-to-peer syncing that you and I like, just added encrypted folders. So that means you're able to sync to a folder, to a machine that is untrusted if you ever have a need to do that. Oh. You're able to assign a long password to a folder, and when it syncs remotely, it will be encrypted before it leaves under that key and then decrypted as it comes back. But everything stored in that synchronized folder will be encrypted, which is not a feature that SyncThing has had until now. So it just got it.
That's good to know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I use SyncThing everywhere all the time. That's really it's not my primary backup, but it's one of my several backup systems. Because basically I have, just like you have multiple machines, multiple locales, and you want to have your source code directory synchronized everywhere. I have my source code, my sync files, my dot files, my documents, my pictures, and my audio all synced to all systems. And it's a great way to do it. It's peer-to-peer.
And if you have a Linux-based NAS, as I do, because I've got Drobos in each location, then I've got SyncThing running natively on the Drobos.
Exactly.
And they're just pulling stuff, they sync each other, and I sync to them.
So that is a pretty good backup strategy. Yeah, I do that on my Synology.
Yeah.
They have a community-based version of SyncThing available.
Nice.
Looks like I already signed up for sync.com. I didn't even notice.
It is.
It's a terrible name, by the way. They should call it Avocado Sync or something, just so that you, because you can't Google it.
Well, and think how much they must have paid for that domain to have sync.com.
Yeah. Yeah.
However, the reason it would be right for John is that I don't think he's sort of a nomad. He's not really a deep computer geek. SyncThing is a little. You need to kind of know your way around. Things.
It's geeky for sure.
It just. And it just does it to the cloud. And so his entire documents folder would just be synced using Sync, and he would never have this problem again.
Oh, I remember why I don't use sync.com. No Linux client. Get them to work on that.
Yep, and they know that. They're they're acutely aware.
Yep. That's unfortunately it's a showstopper for me.
Yep.
Because that's my primary OS.
Yep.
Thank you, Steve. grc.sc/sync if you want to take advantage of that. Let's talk about Barracuda, and then we'll get to your topic of the week. We've had a massive shift, of course, to remote work. This has been a tough year. Let me just ask you, Steve, ransomware on the decline in 2020? No. Barracuda says that 91% of cyber attacks in total start with email. It's those phishing emails, and if you're a business, that's terrifying. I know that I get this email every week from the iHeart security guru, the CISO, whatever her title is, saying, please don't. And that's probably a start, but you can do better. I should send her the link to barracuda.com/security now. You've got to keep those Office 365 accounts secure. You know that. You know that in your inboxes for all your employees, they're on-prem, they're at home, they're on endpoints. You know that those inboxes contain lots of threats. Last year, because of coronavirus, the ransomware, often had coronavirus-related phishing attacks. Here's our company policy. Read this now and sign it. Send it back. Of course, it's not. It's not a PDF at all. It's ransomware. This year, they're trying to leverage activity over vaccines to steal money and personal information from your employees, your customers, and maybe even to take your entire company down with ransomware. It's terrifying out there. Chances are there's something in your inbox right now. So find out. Close the security gaps in your Office 365 email. Guard against new attacks. Use the Barracuda email threat scanner. The criminals are not getting less aggressive. Let's put it that way. Attacks are getting harder and harder to prevent. They're using social engineering, things like urgency and fear to get you to click. FBI says business email compromise scams cost companies more than $1.7 billion in 2019. Social engineering attacks, including spear phishing and business email compromise, cost businesses an average of $130,000 per incident. And if you're Colonial Pipeline, a little bit more. Securing email at the gateway, it's just not enough. It's still important to leverage gateway security to protect against traditional attacks such as viruses, zero-day ransomware, spam, and other threats. Of course, we do that. But those spear phishing attacks go right through. Your gateway is powerless against them. You got to protect at the inbox level as well. What did we just say? Security is a layered approach. No one thing's going to protect you. Your gateway's not going to stop that spear phishing attack. You need protection at the inbox level, including AI and machine learning to keep up with the attacks as they morph constantly. The Barracuda email threat scanner is doing exactly that. It uses AI to continually refine its ability to find and eliminate threats in your Office 365 email. Now, this is a free service you can use right now to analyze your accounts, to identify malicious emails that slip past the gateway and into inboxes that are sitting there just waiting for Joey in accounting to click. Find the cybersecurity threats hiding in your Office 365 email. Get that free email threat scan right now. Barracuda.com/security now. BARRACUDA.com/security now. Barracuda, your journey secured. We thank them so much for supporting Security Now. And I thank you for supporting Security Now by using that address so they know that you heard it here. That's really important to us. Barracuda.com/securitynow. Now, ladies and gentlemen, it's time for our titular topic of the day.
So I titled this TLS Confusion Attacks for reasons that'll become clear. Some very interesting and quite depressing research will be presented at the forthcoming 30th Usenix Security Symposium and this summer's Black Hat USA in Las Vegas about 6 weeks from now at the end of next month. And even though it's not entirely new, it teaches us some interesting lessons about unintended edge case consequences. Now, the researchers apparently struggled to come up with a cute name for this, since the problem, since the problem they were exploring was the mischief that could be created by deliberately confusing the application layer within TLS authenticated and protected connections. They had application layer protocol confusion, ALPC, which is not really anything. But if you add a pair of judiciously placed gratuitous A's into that, you can force this to become alpaca.
Alpaca. Well, at least it's memorable.
And that explains why I chose to name this podcast TLS Confusion Attacks.
But alpacas are so cute, Steve.
Well, regardless of their name, these attacks, they're a truly interesting instance of an unattended consequence edge case, or to use the official term, oops. Here's what happened. In the beginning, we had the UDP and TCP IP protocols. UDP was mostly used for DNS. But over the TCP protocol, we ran Telnet and FTP and SMTP and POP and IMAP and HTTP, and others. Those were the so-called application layer protocols running on top or inside of the TCP transport layer. And back then, the world was simple, but it was not secure. Passive eavesdroppers could listen in on passing internet packets to see what everyone was up to. So there was no assurance of privacy. And active man-in-the-middle attackers could redirect traffic to other destinations without detection. So there was no authentication. But we're clever. So we grafted on SSL, which over the years evolved into TLS. The idea was that our existing plain text application protocols would be given different ports when their TCP connections should be authenticated and encrypted. So HTTP over port 80 became HTTPS over port 443. FTP's port 21 became FTPS over port 990. And SMTP's port 25 became port 587, whenever TLS would be used to secure the SMT protocol. When using these alternate secured ports, immediately after establishing that famous three-way TCP handshake, a sort of shim would be introduced in between the TCP transport layer and the application protocol layer. Before any application layer traffic would be allowed to flow, the two endpoints would need to exchange another set of packets to cryptographically establish the identity of one or both of the endpoints, thus providing endpoint authentication, and agree upon an encryption key that they would henceforth use to encrypt all subsequent communications, thus providing communications privacy. Problem solved? Well, pretty much, but not entirely. The problem was, and has always been, that the SSL TLS protocol is bound to the TCP connection, but not to the underlying application layer the application layer protocol whose traffic it is carrying. In other words, the TLS protocol itself is unaware of the IP and port to which it is connecting. The TCP protocol knows about that, but not TLS. It's naive to that. So it does the same thing if the connection is to HTTPS as if it was to secure SMTP. TLS doesn't care at all. But the underlying application protocol does care which port it's connected to, because that determines which service it's talking to. And therein lies the edge case. Since the TLS is not bound to the connection's IP and port, they can be changed, and TLS won't care. It won't even notice. But since the underlying protocol does care, that creates a problem. And this opens what appeared to be a safe and secure system to what the researchers term cross-protocol attacks. Here's what the abstract of their paper explains. It says, TLS is widely used to add confidentiality, authenticity, and integrity to application layer protocols such as HTTP, SMTP, IMAP, POP3, and NFTP. However, TLS does not bind a TCP connection to the intended application layer protocol. This allows a man-in-the-middle attacker to redirect TLS traffic to a different TLS service endpoint on another IP address and or port. For example, they write, if subdomains share a wildcard certificate, an attacker can redirect traffic from one subdomain to another, resulting in a valid TLS session. This breaks the authentication of TLS, and cross-protocol attacks may be possible, where the behavior of one service may compromise the security of the other at the application layer. Okay, so let me pause for a second. What they're saying is that if, for example, GitHub were to use the same TLS certificate for HTTPS as for their secure SMTP, it might be possible to redirect an incoming user's web browser connection, which is intended for GitHub's HTTPS port 443, to their secure SMT port 587. And because the same TLS certificate will be used to negotiate the connection's TCP security either way, it may be possible to take advantage of this protocol-level confusion. Okay, so continuing with their abstract, they say, in this paper, we investigate cross-protocol attacks on TLS in general and conduct a systematic case study on web servers, redirecting HTTPS requests from a victim's web browser to secure SMTP, IMAP, POP3, and FTP servers. We show that in realistic scenarios, the attacker can extract session cookies and other private user data or execute arbitrary JavaScript in the context of the vulnerable web server. In other words, inject script. Therefore, they write, bypassing TLS and web application security. They finish, we evaluate the real-world attack surface of web browsers and widely deployed email and FTP servers in lab environments and with internet-wide scans. We find that 1.4 million web servers are generally vulnerable to cross-protocol attack, i.e., TLS application data confusion is possible. Of these, 114,000 web servers, so just shy of 1 out of every 10, can be attacked using an exploitable application server. Finally, we discussed the effectiveness of TLS extensions such as Application Layer Protocol Negotiation, ALPN, and Server Name Indication, SNI, in mitigating these and other cross-protocol attacks. Okay, so the main takeaway here is, I think, that not only is security difficult, it's even significantly more difficult than we know. In fact, it might be even more difficult than we can know.
We can. That's the problem.
Yes.
Yes. The giveaway was when you said, but we're clever. Yeah, that's the giveaway. Don't get clever. Yeah.
Yeah, never get clever. So to put this into context, this is not the end of the world. The attack requires sophistication and the ability to establish a man-in-the-middle position, the ability to actively manipulate the traffic coming and going from a victim in real time. But it's certainly within the reach of state-level attackers, and it does mean that users are not really obtaining the security that we think we've always had. These attacks also require a very specific set of circumstances. The researchers described what they uncovered. They said, in practice, cross-protocol attacks are sensitive to many requirements, such as certificate compatibility, ability to upload, download, or reflect data, and application tolerance towards syntax errors caused by mixing two protocols in one channel. It's a edge case. They said, in our case study of cross-protocol attacks on HTTPS using, and this is secure SMTP, IMAP, POP3, and FTP application servers, we addressed these concerns in 3 evaluations. First, we identified 25 popular SMTP, IMAP, POP3, and FTP implementations and evaluated their suitability for cross-protocol attacks on HTTPS in a series of lab experiments. We found that 13 of the 25 are exploitable with at least one attack method. We also implemented a full proof of concept that demonstrates all 3 attack methods on a well-secured web server using exploitable SMTP, IMAP, POP3, and FTP application servers. Second, we evaluated 7 browsers for their error tolerance. We find that Internet Explorer and Edge Legacy still perform content sniffing and thus are vulnerable to all presented attacks. Okay, but so by context sniffing, they're meaning, and I couldn't believe this, IE and Edge Legacy look at the protocol text to determine what the protocol is. That is, does this look like HTTP or does this look like FTP?
They just call it deep packet inspection.
You're
and get
kidding me.
Yes.
They're kidding me. Anyway, they said while all other browsers allow at least FTP upload and download attacks. And third, in an internet-wide scan, we collected X.509 certs, which are, the standard web certs, served by SMTP, IMAP, POP3, and FTP servers. We analyzed how many of these are likely to be trusted by major web browsers. In other words, are they using the same certs? GRC does. It's easy, and they're good, so why not? For each certificate, we extracted the host names in the common name field and the SAN, the server SAN.
Storage area network.
Alternate names. Server alternate names.
Oh, okay.
Extension.
We have unfortunately acronym overload here.
We do. And checked because when you're only going to use 3 letters, you're in trouble.
Running out,
and checked if there exists, alpaca, that's pretty safe. And checked if there exists a web server on these hosts. They said, we found, and here's where this number comes, 1.4 million web servers that are compatible with at least one trusted application server certificate, meaning that the same certificate is crossing between applications, web and mail, web and FTP, whatever. They said, making them vulnerable to cross-protocol attacks. Of these, 119,000 web servers are compatible with an application server that is exploitable in our lab settings. Okay, so this is bad. What can be done? It's a decidedly mixed blessing because while it's unlikely to occur, given the proper conditions, it can. And when it's exploited, it can result in logged-on session hijacking because you're able to read the browser cookie, the session cookie, which is supposed to be unreadable. Otherwise, we're back in what was that? That was the fire sheep. Remember those innocent days of yore, Leo? You could go to Starbucks and just hop onto other people's logged-in sessions. We were so innocent back then.
Oh, yeah.
And if you can inject malicious JavaScript, then you're running that malicious JavaScript in the context of the fully trusted web server, which means you can do anything. The fact that it's unlikely to occur, unfortunately, reduces the pressure to make any changes. Right? This is not like Heartbleed or, for example, in Dan Kaminsky's famous fix for DNS, which only required that the DNS servers be fixed. The changes that need to be made here have to occur at both ends of the TLS connections. So all the clients and all of the servers. There is currently a well-defined solution for this. It's called ALPN. That stands for Application Layer Protocol Negotiation. It does exactly what its name sounds like and what we need. It's an optional extension for TLS connection setup, which allows the endpoints to explicitly agree upon the protocol that the connection will be carrying. That's the thing that's missing from TLS now, is that nothing tells TLS what it's going to be carrying. But ALPN, an optional extension, does. And it turns out that it does this without needing any additional packet round trips or anything. It's just added to the existing TLS as one of the extensions in the already well-defined packets. And since support for the HTTP/2 protocol needs to be able to smoothly upgrade an HTTP 1.1 connection to HTTP 2. In other words, that's exactly what we need here. We need an HTTP 2 server to be able to negotiate an HTTP 2 connection with the other endpoint. Only if both endpoints agree. This is now being done via ALPN to the degree that HTTP 2 has been deployed. So ALPN support is already emerging. However, protection from web-based protocol confusion attacks, that is, these kinds of attacks, requires that all TLS connection accepting services, which could be unwitting participants in protocol confusion, meaning all FTP servers, SMTP, POP3, IMAP, and so forth, also support ALPN and flatly reject and terminate any non-ALPN enhanced connections. And I can't imagine a world in which that's ever going to happen. I'm not just, it's hard enough to get moved from IP4 to IPv6. This like, well, it's probably no one's going to get abused by this, and it's a theoretical attack, and really we have to replace everything, and we don't get any protection until we mandate that everybody do it, and anybody that doesn't gets hung up on. No, I don't recognize that world. It's not the one we're in. So we can imagine that future non-web services might begin to incorporate ALPN awareness, but that's entirely different from, as I said, refusing connections from remote clients that are not offering ALPN enhanced TLS. The outlook is not good. They conclude their own paper saying, we demonstrated that the lack of strong authentication of service endpoints in TLS can be abused by attackers to perform powerful cross-protocol attacks with unforeseeable consequences. And now this is where Bruce Schneier's attacks never get worse, they only ever get better, is ringing in our ears. We may be revisiting some new consequence that has been literally, these guys said, unforeseeable. So something unforeseen may emerge from this. They said our internet-wide scans showed that it is common, I'm guilty, for administrators to deploy compatible certificates across multiple services. Why not? Seemed like a good idea. Possibly without consideration to cross-protocol attacks. Yeah, I didn't think about that. We also showed that cross-protocol attacks are practical, although the impact is limited and difficult to assess from lab experiments alone. In the real world, cross-protocol attacks will always be situational and target individual users or groups. However, it is also clear that existing countermeasures are ineffective because they do not address all possible attack scenarios. We've identified one countermeasure that is far superior to others: the pervasive use of the ALPN extension to TLS by both client and server. Luckily, ALPN is easy to deploy with the next software update without affecting legacy clients or servers. So, yeah, that's true. You could put it out there, get it in place, and wait for it to, for everyone to have it, and then flip the switch to make it mandatory. But again, it's necessary to make it mandatory to actively refuse any non-APLN enhanced connections, and I don't know if that's going to happen in our lifetime. So I wanted to put this on everyone's radar because we may be coming back. Mm-hmm. There may be Alpaca 2.
Wow.
Yeah. Unforeseen. Like nobody ever said. I mean, it seemed like wrapping our TCP connections in TLS.
Seemed like a good idea.
What could go wrong?
Right.
Well, as I said, the official term is oops.
It's subtle, though. I mean, I could see how you might miss it.
Yeah.
Wow. But that's the problem, is we've got to the point now where any flaw, even the smallest. It's so
confusing. It's so complicated.
Yeah. That's what it really is. It's these multiple interactions. It's the complexity of the system. It's almost chaotic at this point, in which case if it's unpredictable, you can't do it right. Interesting.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. I think that's a good analogy. I think we are approaching the chaos, formal mathematical chaos.
that is not you were right. Now I am depressed. I was all happy because you solved the most impossible problem I've ever heard, and now you just ruined it. Steve Gibson, he's the guy. Man, is he the man? I'll tell you what. Go to grc.com. He's got lots of great stuff there, free stuff. Of course, his bread and butter, SpinRite, the world's best mass storage recovery and maintenance utility. I was sure that story was going to end with a spin drive, but you threw me a curve. You threw me a curve there. There's nothing wrong with a drive. Very clever. Yep. This is the guy you want working on your hard drive, trust me. SpinRite's there, but also so is this show. There's 16 kilobit versions, audio versions for the bandwidth impaired. There's a very well-done text transcript, human written by Elaine Ferris, who does such a good job. Thanks to Steve, all at grc.com. He also has a 64 kilobit audio version. We have audio and video at our website, twit.tv/SN. You can also subscribe in your favorite podcast client, get it automatically. If you do that, though, please leave us a review. 5 stars would be appreciated, and I think Steve has earned it today, no doubt about it. On the website, twit.tv/SN, we'll also have links to our YouTube channel. It'll have links to the RSS. You can paste into any client, also to some of the big name clients. Just push button links, make it easy for you. If you're watching live at twit.tv/live, and we do this show every Tuesday at 1:30 Pacific, 4:30 Eastern, 20:30 UTC. Chat live with us, irc.twit.tv. There's also another way you can chat if you're a member of the club. Now, I don't want to be all exclusive about all this and all that. Anybody can join the club. It's a mere $7 a month. It's a big help for us. This has been a very tough year for all podcasters, and I don't anticipate things are going to get much better just because, podcasting is moving behind paywalls. But we don't want to make a paywall. We want to continue to offer everything for free, and we will. We can, anyway, with your support. $7 a month, what do you get? Ad-free versions of all the shows, including this one, audio and video. You also get entry into that great Discord server. It's turning out to be great fun, lots of fun. We talk about security in there. Every show has a channel, lots of topic channels. I even go in there and play Valheim once in a while. It's just a lot of fun stuff. And there's a Twit Plus feed with things like what Steve and I talk about sometimes before the show. If we do another vitamin D episode, we'll put it on the Club Twit Plus feed. I think that's a good place to put it. All of that available to you for $7 a month. Find out more at twit.tv/clubtwit. Now, Steve, I asked you and Lori to come on the cruise with us and never heard back. I'm guessing Lori's not a cruiser is my guess.
Really not a cruiser.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Really not.
But for those of you who like cruises, a year from now, almost exactly, in July 2022, we're going to do our first Twit cruise. First optimistically. We're going to try it out, see what happens, see if people are interested. You can find out more about that at cruise.twit.tv. It'll be an Alaska cruise, 7 days in Alaska. I've done this before on Holland America. That's what we're on. We're on the Eurodom, and it's a beautiful ship, and it's a really beautiful cruise. And we're going to have a lot of fun. If we get enough people signed up, we can bring another host, not Steve. Well, you can go without Lori. I'm just saying. No. I'm just saying. I know she's your wife and all, but anyway. Enough said. Don't want to push it, but we would like to get. If it's, I'll go through in the order of seniority. So we'll go with the people who've been with us the longest, and we'll work our way down. And I'm not sure who would be next after Steve. Steve's easily the most. Maybe Dick T. Bartolo would probably be next. Maybe he's probably next. Did I say spin drive? I meant SpinRite. Yeah, apparently I said spin drive.
We all knew. Yeah, the most downloaded thing at GRC until 6.1 is available is the DNS benchmark.
Yeah, I'm not surprised.
3,000 downloads a day. Every single day.
A really good way.
In, day out.
Because people, I think, are starting to realize they don't want to use their ISP's DNS servers, but they don't want to use a slow one either.
Yeah.
And so they want to, and if so, they're thinking about Cloudflare or Quad 9s or NextDNS. There are a lot of them now.
And how would you know?
How would you know which is the best? So test it.
Yep.
That's a great free download. Steve's very generous. A lot of great stuff there. GRC.com. He's also on Twitter at SGGRC. That's where you can DM him, slip into his DMs. They're open. You can also message him at grc.com/feedback, right? Yeah, grc.com/feedback. His forums are great too. Forums.grc.com. Is that right? Forums?
Right. That's correct. Yep.
Steve, have a wonderful week. Try to convince Lori that cruising isn't so bad. It's Alaska. We're going to go see. We'll be in Victoria, British Columbia. The Bouchard Gardens are incredible. All right. I'm not going to pressure. Thanks, Steve. Have a great week. We'll see you next time on Security Now.
Thanks, buddy. Bye.
Hey, I hope you enjoyed that podcast episode. If you would like to check out more about tech news, then you should check out Tech News Weekly with me, Micah Sargent, my co-host Jason Howell, where we interview the people making and breaking the tech news every week.
Security Now.